Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to the Cosmic Switchboard Show. Today, our very special guest is David Case. David is an inventor and electronic engineer. David had come up with the idea of a light-operated computer. He went to patent it, and within a few months of meeting with a patent attorney, he was attacked. The symptoms were strong ringing and shrieking in his ears, and he had to learn how to go about protecting himself from these electronic warfare attacks, and he subsequently developed a means to do so. So we will find out from David exactly how this whole process unfolded. David's website is antitinnitusv2k.com. So without any further ado, David, welcome to the Cosmic Switchboard Show.
Thank you.
How did this whole thing come about?
Well, I started out very young working on electronics, teaching myself electronics and inventing different things. I made my own chemistry set at 10 years old. I eventually started making really cool inventions. I made a levitator, levitates metal objects right after I got my degree. And then I started working on solar inventions and a light-operated data storage device. I called it a multi-dimensional data storage device, and it used light beams instead of electricity. I then developed a computer that would operate it, and I call it a photonic processor because it used light beams, the color spectrum for a data bus instead of electricity or electron flow. And that's when the trouble started. I tried to patent it, and I essentially was attacked with what is called artificial tinnitus, very similar to the U.S. diplomats in Cuba. They were attacked with a similar system, causes a loud ringing or electronic shrieking in the ears as the signals hit the skin. The moisture in the skin expands and contracts so fast that it forms sounds in your head as they bounce around the skull. And it can actually cause brain damage, as we found with our diplomats in Cuba. So it is a weapon system. It's designed to take that person out of society and remove them from their job to stop what they're doing. And it's been developed around the world by many countries. In 1976, our diplomats were attacked in Russia, and aides to the president would suddenly start crying for no reason. And they found that they were bombarding the diplomats in Moscow, at the U.S. facility there, with a frequency that affected emotions. So this has been going on for a long time. I was attacked for trying to patent a light-operated computer. Later, I found that they already have light-operated computers, and they're classified as secret. So, I had stumbled on to something that the U.S. government does not want people to know. And now I find out why. They're using these systems as a weapon system to attack people around the world as an experimentation method to perfect these military weapons. They have surrounded the Earth with satellites with devices called quantum interference detection devices. So essentially, they have turned the entire Earth into an MRI, magnetic imaging resonance, and they can read your biosignature, that's your brain waves, heart rate, body temperature, all of the transmissions that occur of our biosystems. We're essentially transmitters, and our body is emitting different frequencies. And they read those and use that as a serial number to track you. And if they don't like you, they can push a button and actually affect brain chemistry, affect your emotions, take you out of civilization, and actually, cause many problems in your body, health problems. And so after I was attacked, I lost everything. I had to stop the patent process. I lost all of my jobs. And you can't sleep when there's loud shrieking in both ears. And that's the goal. Once the victim, the target, receives the artificial tinnitus, it destroys their sleep, and they cannot rebuild their brain chemistry. Sleep is vital to your life. Eventually, it got so bad that I was in a desperate situation. I begged God for help, and I got to thinking, well, I'm an electronic engineer. Why can't I make something that sounds a lot like the tinnitus, the artificial tinnitus, and interfere with it? So I began wiring two IC chips, oscillator IC chips, together randomly. I had no plans, no schematics. I just started wiring it. And when I turned it on, it made the strangest sounds. So I recorded them, put them on headphones, and voila, boom, it knocked out the tinnitus. So I slowly began to get my life back, and I began to give out this countermeasure to other people. And so far to date, we've helped over 2,000 people stop many conditions, such as the tinnitus, voices. It also stops voices. Many people refer to that as V2K, the voice of God weapon. It stops clicking sounds. It stops many what is called phantom sounds that people hear. And doctors say, well, you don't really hear them. They're phantom sounds. But I tell you, they are real and they are loud. And it is essentially directed energy weapon system. It is just abhorrent to attack your own citizens with weapons of war. And I'm getting the word out, and I'm offering this countermeasure to anybody that wants it, protect themselves, and that's why I'm here.
I've been on the receiving end of some electronic interference. What would happen to me sometimes, I would start to hear ticking and cracks in the walls, like loud, sharp crack. And sometimes I would detect an increase in, it seemed to me, maybe not in a real ambient temperature sense, but it seemed to me that my skin was starting to heat up, right? And I would start to hear all these cracks in the walls. Does that sound familiar to anything that you've heard as far as like the popping sounds and the cracking noises?
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty common among targeted individuals. And the heating is from the moisture in your skin acting as a transducer. It turns one form of energy into another. When the energy hits your skin, it either transfers it to heat or sound.
The sound aspect as well. What happened to me one time after a particularly really negative experience, which I'll get into at some point, there was this track that kept playing in my head. It was a horrific track. If you know who that pedophile Gary Glitter is, been convicted for having child pornography, et cetera, he had that song kind of that was playing a lot at ballparks and at stadiums. And it was a very repetitive kind of a droning dirge-like thing. Well, I watched a lot of baseball back then. That song came up a lot. So when I got zapped and I got beamed, whoever was doing it seemed to know that I had a familiarity with that tune. And so when I woke up from this particularly horrific zapping experience, that drone, that played that song all the time back in the old days at the ballparks, what have you. I couldn't get that song out of my head. It was like a force I felt inside my brain. This went on for several minutes upon awakening. And it just occurred to me, let me turn the radio on, get some other music involved and see if it disrupts this pattern. And then I turned the stereo on, and sure enough, it stopped that music, if you want to call it that, from playing in my head. How would they go about doing something like that?
They have the ability, like I say, to read your brain waves and your memories and take part of those and actually torture you with it. It's called psychological warfare. Even cell phones, they found out that during important decisions in your life, if the phone beeps or buzzes or vibrates, it can change your mind during an important decision. So they can actually use electronic devices around you to affect you. they can send many different effects to the skull and the body. And voices are some of the worst that I've heard of. It's absolute torture to hear what the voices tell people all the time. And it's very discouraging. There's no voices that are sent to people that are complimenting the person. They're absolutely pounding them, trying to affect their emotions and causing detrimental things to their body and psychosis. But yeah, there's many ways to do these things too, and I believe they're working on at least 4 different methods to attack anyone they want. The whole purpose of these weapons, they don't want to have to arrest you, go to trial, and all this process, and it takes a long time. Or they don't want to go to your house and shoot you, because then there's evidence and it ends up in the evening newspaper. They want a secret, silent way to remove people from civilization by just pushing a button and they go insane within a few weeks. That's what the goal of all this technology is.
There was a woman I was in contact with before I think she committed suicide because she couldn't take it anymore. I can say her name now because she's passed. Her name was Carol Sterling. And she ran afoul of some kind of government types. I forgot the circumstances. She didn't want to go along with some kind of business deal where she would have been ripped off, whatever the case may be. And then one of the businessmen, so-called, that she was dealing with said something to the effect of, well, if you won't go along with this, we've got that thing in Alaska that'll take care of you, or words to that effect. But he did mention Alaska. And thereafter, she started getting electronically harassed to the point where all of the muscles in her body would ache. She would get tremendous headaches, migraines. It felt like her body was on fire. She would go to the doctor. Of course, they would never find anything. They would never diagnose anything. She would tell her family and friends they thought she was crazy, essentially. And so this harassment continued for some time. And then I eventually lost comms with her. I found out through the grapevine that she had died. She had been suggesting to me that just waking up in the morning was such a trial that she didn't want to go through with it anymore. And she hinted strongly at committing suicide. So I think that maybe there was something to do with that project or whatever in Alaska. Some people inferred maybe he was referring to HARP or some other program. At any rate, the interference was such that she may have committed suicide. And another person I knew, a very good friend of mine, he was a surfer in San Diego, and he was a property manager. And he used to frequent a bar in Tijuana. He didn't know it at the time. It was a CIA mercenary recruitment bar. And he was talking to some guy at the bar there, and they'd gotten to know each other. Before too long, the guy tried to proposition him into smuggling arms into the U.S., and he wouldn't go along with it because he's a sensible guy. Thereafter, he was afflicted with the voice-to-skull phenomenon. And he said, in his case, he would get 24/7 of this hardcore patriotic mind control, lambasting him for not being a good American, lambasting him for not being a patriot. And this went on and on and on. Eventually, he broke mentally, and he was prescribed meds. And then it turned out later on the meds he was being prescribed were hypnotics that were making him more susceptible to suggestibility, essentially. So
right.
he was caught up in that cycle for years, and it all came about because he was going to this bar in Tijuana. He rejected a recruitment offer, and then bam, they hit him with all this stuff, voice-to-skull, and it drove him mad basically for a while.
I have a lot of the scientific documents where they invented this mind control. And I sent you one, and I'll read part of that because this document describes exactly their plans. And this was back in the 70s. Within the last 2 decades, a potential has emerged which was improbable, but which is now feasible. This potential is the technical capability to influence directly the major portion of the approximately 6 billion brains of the human species without meditation, through classical sensory modalities, by generating neural information within a physical medium within which all members of the species are immersed. Now, what you were just talking about, HAARP, that directly affects the magnetic flux lines of the Earth. Those magnetic flux lines of the Earth run right through us, everyone, everything. So what they're doing with HAARP is yanking on those magnetic flux lines, and this travels through our bodies and can affect our biorhythms, our brain waves, etc. And he even goes on to warn this could potentially be very dangerous. And he's inventing this stuff. And he says historical emergence of such possibilities have ranged from gunpowder to atomic fission, have resulted in major changes in the social evolution and occurred inordinately quickly after the implementation. Reduction of the risk of inappropriate application of these technologies requires the continued and open discussion of their realistic feasibility and implications within the scientific and public domain. I'll just translate that document. They were planning many decades ago to broadcast neural information to every brain on Earth to take over the thoughts of that brain, of every brain. And this is non-consensual too, as he states, without meditation. People do not have to do anything. They will receive the neural information, good or bad. And of course, the governments of the world aren't going to send out good neural information. It's a weapon. Everything is weaponized nowadays, no matter what it is. This is extremely dangerous technology. We are essentially in a psychotronic war. Russia started the woodpecker signal on July 4th, 1976. 4 different directions the U.S. was bombarded with 10 hertz. And that's a psychotronic frequency. In response, the U.S. started bombarding Russia with 16 hertz, which is a psychoactive frequency. And on and on and on, people of the world are being attacked by different governments and their own governments because it's a race to the bottom. Our scientists are very smart, but they are doing very dumb things by inventing this ability for our governments to attack anyone they want.
You mentioned earlier about something to the effect of brain mapping. Nowadays, a lot of people, I've gone through this too, where it's one thing to mention out loud with a digital device nearby, oh, well, I'm thinking about getting some kind of gardening tool, or I think I'm going to get some kind of a book, and then whammo, that very same item you were looking for starts showing up on your social media news feeds, starts showing up in the sidebar of your inbox for your emails. So that's been going on for some time. But what other people have described and what I've experienced is sometimes we don't even verbalize an intention or an interest in something, and then magically these things start showing up in our news feeds. Now, what happened to me years ago, and I'd like your thoughts on this, was you remember when I mentioned about all the popping sounds and the cracking noises, and sometimes it would be to such an extent as if there was some sudden weight pushed onto my flat gravel roof, like, right? And sometimes that would come in response, no kidding, to I would have like a brief negative thought about the New World Order, how much I despise them, right? And even before I could complete that thought in my head, pop, there would be the sound. It was almost as if it was a response. I had not even completed my thought, in other words. Somewhere along the line, maybe some spike showed up and someone censored, oh, he's about to have a negative thought on us. So we'll just remind him who's boss, and here comes the popping sound or whatever. You know what I mean? So if you could kind of talk us through that process, how does that work? How do they determine what we're thinking, even to the point of determining what we're going to think before we think it?
Well, that's how they sold this to Congress and the government. The CIA went to the government and said, hey, we have a way to detect the thoughts of all terrorists before they actually do anything. And Congress said, oh, great, we'll stop terrorism. But in actuality, the criminals now have the CIA, the NSA, a lot of these agencies act and do just what mafia organizations do. And so it's a bit like hiring the wolf to watch over the chicken shed to keep the jackals away. It just don't work. I call them high-tech criminals. We're entering an age where if we don't do something now, it could really be too late if we don't stand up and resist this. I'm doing my best to try to find other engineers to invent countermeasures to prevent this absolute takeover or power grab of the entire human species. Technology really is the new magic. You know, in the old days, they made potions, cast spells. Now, technology gives them the ability to do all of this in a concrete fashion. And here's what gets me. We paid for it, our tax dollars. The U.S. citizens paid for their own weapon systems that are attacking them. It's just amazing how they have got away with this. And Congress needs to reverse and defund all of these agencies that are using weapons of warfare on civilians.
How about as far as influencing behavior? Because we know that they can disrupt people radically in the ways you described. It seems to me that not only overtly through mass media, television, Hollywood influencers and the like, it seems to me that there's some kind of covert mechanism at work, probably related to what you're talking about, that subtly and not so subtly influences people's behavior, compels them to do things they know at some level is not right, not good, go out and do something bad, go out and indulge in certain behaviors, certain activities that are not good. It seems to me, David, that the moral compass of people en masse are being subverted. We see this all the time, exemplified by the whole woke culture. Can you comment on that?
That's absolutely one of the goals. I was watching a college channel once, and the professor was doing a seminar, and he went on to explain they had modified a flu virus in a way that when a person caught this flu virus, if they were religious, they totally lost any desire to be religious. They absolutely lost their religion. It's amazing what their plans are with this kind of stuff. And they could have already released this. And this also could be explaining why the morals of the world are just disappearing. More than that, they have technology called shape circuits. I don't know how old you are or remember, but in the 1940s and 50s, they caught drive-in theaters slicing the film and putting one frame of a hot dog or a soda. And the audience really didn't see it. The subconscious saw it. And as soon as that frame hit, many of them would go up and buy a hot dog or a soda. So they increased sales that way. Now, this developed into what is called organic computer programs. We are essentially, our brain is an organic computer. And just like any other device, we can be influenced. There is no firewall for the brain. In 1995, joint U.S. and European scientists invented a suicide chip. Essentially a video. When you watched it, it programmed your brain into immediately committing suicide. But what happened was these scientists went home and committed suicide. And there's strong evidence to suggest that the U.S. military and European military used that technology on the scientists themselves to eliminate any evidence, to cover up the invention. So there's many things that are going on in the world to hijack humanity, is what I call it. And these are high-tech criminals, nothing less.
A lot of talk these days centers around the impending rollout, if it already hasn't started, of the 5G network. How would that play into what you're describing, this setup that they've created with the electronic warfare?
It goes hand in foot with the systems that they're designing. And cell phone waves unwind our DNA. Our DNA act like antenna that receive the energy, and our bodies have to rewind our DNA and repair that. Many other biosystems are affected by cell phones and cell towers. And I always tell people, do not ever put a cell phone next to your head. If you have to use one, use speakerphone or a Bluetooth device that is not connected close to your head. And I am absolutely convinced that there is classified methods that they can use with cell phones that I don't even know about. It is very dangerous technology. And I live in an area that I don't get cell service, and I love it. I call it God's country. I really feel sorry for these people who live in downtown cities with all of that radiation. There's so many radiation points in these big cities that it's amazing how much damage they're doing to people.
What's happened as far as the cell phones are concerned, there were a number of freedom rallies in the wake of all the lockdowns and the restrictions for this so-called pandemic. What happened to people en masse was the ones who went to the protest, they found out a couple of things. One, within the targeted area, say they were protesting at a state capitol somewhere or a federal capitol, they found out that A, their mobile devices didn't work. B, that they would drain out of energy very rapidly. It didn't matter how often they recharged it. And C, they found that not only were they not able to use their phones, not only did they seem to be drained of energy very quickly, but the cell phones themselves became somewhat weaponized. They found that they would either be too hot to touch or they felt distinct emissions emanating from the phones. It was almost as if one didn't know any better. And the telecoms were totally on board with this, along with the government, that they have done something remotely to only those people that were there to protest. And everyone else seemed to be okay. If, a local in that community would have no problems with their phones. But for people coming in from out of town to protest, they got this problem with their phones. Another thing also, David, is they found out that usually, even if you're out of range of your telecom service, you can still utilize the camera and the video function of the phones. They couldn't even do that. They couldn't even use the cameras. They couldn't use the phones. But it seemed like the phones had been manipulated in such a way as to emit even more radiation than normal.
Like I tell everybody else, that your cell phone is not just a cell phone. Your TV is not just a TV. Your computers, it is several other devices that you are not to know about. They've caught cell phone companies with older phones sending signals to the phones, draining the batteries to make the person go get a new phone. And there's many other things they can do with your phone. I do not like technology. I have a degree in engineering, engineering, and I do not like technology because it's being used against us. It's a power over us. We really have to get away from technology sometime in our life and get back to nature and just be healthy and do things that rebuild the body and not hover around your phone or hover around your computer. The television is one of the most dangerous devices there are with these, what I call organic computer programs. I have witnessed people, when I was attacked, I witnessed people that were doing things that they did not know they were doing. And they were able to switch off consciousness and use that person just like a drone, a rag doll, and make them do things that they did not remember. And we're entering a very dangerous time, and people need to wake up. Technology is not your friend.
Well, what's even more pernicious is how they're targeting the young. When one takes a glance at some of the suggested videos on YouTube, for example, a young child goes on there, they just want to watch a cartoon or they want to watch SpongeBob or something. And then on the sidebar, all these weird thumbnails pop up of all these suggested videos. And then when you plug into them, They are these weird characters who act in this bizarre, frenetic manner. And it seems to me it's all meant to make the kids watching those videos behave in a like manner. So the kids begin, and I've seen this myself, they begin acting erratically. They begin parroting and mimicking some of the behaviors we're seeing on these videos. And there's a very dark aspect to Google and to YouTube and to the things they do. Another thing that I'd like to mention is back in the day, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I've heard similar stories, but this was a person who had been gang stalked and had received electronic harassment and was definitely under mind control. And she told me that not just like the radio or the television would mess with her and indeed, quote unquote, talk to her, but she said other appliances, even the coffee maker, the brew maker, when she'd wake up in the morning, she would hear sounds and what have you emanating from some of these devices, including the refrigerator. And I had no reason to doubt her because she always came across to me as a sincere person. Of course, when she told friends that were not as clued into all this, they thought, again, well, she's crazy, right? Fast forward to the present, and then we have people like General Petraeus boasting about the Internet of Things, how everything will be connected. And I'm thinking, well, this was already going on decades ago because my friend was going through these problems with not just her, like I said, her radio or TV, but other appliances around the house. Basically anything that was plugged in seemed to be weaponized against her. How would they do something like that, if even such a thing is possible?
Oh, yeah, that's easy. What they're doing is they have an artificial intelligence that runs this targeting system because it is very, very fast in making decisions and calculations. In other words, when I had artificial tinnitus, they would increase it and decrease it when my refrigerator kicked on. To the point, at first I was like, why is the refrigerator causing my tinnitus to go up? So I'd unplug the refrigerator. And then the clock's ticking. They would synchronize the tinnitus with the clock's ticking. So what they do is pick up and read your thoughts and what your ears are picking up, the sounds around you, and then weaponize those. And to do that is highly disturbing to the consciousness when they synchronize the attack to sounds around you. And what it causes the person, the target, to do is start turning off their main breaker, sitting there in the dark, or worse, leaving their home and fleeing across the country trying to get away from these signals. It's really torture for these people that go through this. And that's why on my website, I don't charge for the CD or SD card. I just charge for the shipping. And I'm trying to get as many of the countermeasures out there as I can to stop this. That's what has to occur. We need more people, more engineers working on this.
Probably this is a discussion for another time, but is there a way to broadcast this en masse, maybe even below the audible hearing level, where it would still have a beneficial impact? I don't know what the range would be, say a radius of, say, a mile or a half mile or whatever the case may be. Is something like that feasible? Were enough funds and the engineering available?
You mean my countermeasure?
Yes. Is there a way to scale it up?
Sure. But if you use electromagnetic waves, then the FCC comes into play, and I guarantee you they would never allow that.
Oh, that
but
makes sense.
Here's something interesting. Here's something interesting, though. A study was done on my sound jammer in the United Kingdom, and they found 2.8 megahertz of ultrasonics in my sound file. Now, 2.8 megahertz of ultrasonics could be transmitted, and I've read several articles that nanochips communicate with 2.8 megahertz of ultrasonics. So if we're dealing with a sprayed nanochip world where they've sprayed tiny particles that are actually smart dust, and they get into our bodies and they're using those to interfere with our brain, we could actually transmit ultrasonics at high power. I don't believe any regulatory agency regulates that, we could possibly do it en masse. You can't hear ultrasonics. So no one would even know it. And we could actually use high power, 2.8 megahertz. And here's the other part. Around 3 megahertz is known in medical journals to heal many biosystems. It causes neuroplasticity. It heals the brain. It heals veins. There's a thin membrane in all of your veins. It heals that, on and on and on. I'll send you a bunch of links to these medical journals. So not only could we stop targeting on a mass scale, but actually help people heal, because they're causing brain damage when they're targeting these people. We could actually do quite a bit of good by developing a high-power 2.8 megahertz jammer, and nobody would hear it, and we could actually possibly stop these high-tech criminals.
That's very encouraging. Well, this is a good time to take a break. Could you tell our listeners, David, how they can find your website?
Yeah, the website is antitinnitusv2k.com. That's ANTITINNITUS, V as in Victor, the number 2, K as in kite.com. All we do is send out SD cards and CDs, depending on which one you want. And it is only $19 for shipping. And you just donate $19 for the shipping and give your address, and I will send one out within 24 hours. And you do need to get a special set of headphones. They are very cheap, though, $19 on Amazon. And those are KOSS, KOSS, the manufacturer. And the model number is KTX Pro 1, PRO1. And the reason you have to get these headphones, Dr. Deinshin, that did the study on the sounds, believes that the reason the KOSS headphones are passing the 2.8 megahertz, because most headphones will never send out that high of a frequency. He believes that it's from magnetostriction, and it's a phenomenon that occurs in coils. When you electrify a wire, it actually lengthens. When you take away the electricity, it shortens. That's why transformers hum. But so in other words, the KOSS headphones are actually reproducing the 2.8 megahertz of ultrasonics. And this is jamming their ability to read your biosignature.
Oh, that's fantastic, David. Thank you so much for doing all this. I mean, sometimes what I've seen in the past is some people that are just minding their own business, they're living life, and then this intrusive, call it the New World Order, call it the globalists, call it whatever one wants to, but this external, essentially Luciferian force imposes itself on these people for no valid reason. And then for some of these people who've been messed with, they turn a negative into a positive. And that's what you've done, David. Thank you so much for that. For our dear listeners out there, if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next segment.